let's talk about this NASDAQ for a second. And every once in a while, you play some games over there with your friends that we're charting or your customers, and you'll take a name off a chart, you'll put things upside down, you'll do this, that, the other thing. If we took the name off of it and everything, and we just drew some, kind of crude lines here, I mean, it's kind of constructive looking, right? This is going back to January 2022, Carter.
Right. So if you could alter one thing, it would make it very constructive. If you could remove the August high, right? So if we had come down in January as we did and sort of wallowed in base and then we stayed down in September, and then October was the actual low, that would have more of a sort of a rounding bottom, a bearish to bullish reversal. But we spiked right in August. In fact, spiked so much that the street went bullish, right? In fact, you heard the statistic, never in the history of markets have you retraced more than 50% of a decline, and we had, and not gone on and made new highs, new bull. In fact, it was exact opposite. Of course, we crashed from there. But if one could remove that, we would be in a really good position to sort of pop higher. But we cannot remove the August spike, and so there's overhead supply, right? There's congestion, there's stock ahead, as the expression goes.
Yeah, I mean, Guy, again, we've talked a lot about how during this period over the last few weeks, just the NASDAQ has been a huge beneficiary. In particular, Apple, Microsoft, even Google rallied like 15%, Alphabet, right, off of those recent lows. NVIDIA just kept on powering ahead. And so when you think about how much of those names are the weight of the NASDAQ 100, I think those top 6 names are nearly 50% or so. Does that make you feel like more constructive? You know what I mean? Like, listen, we're getting into quarter end. There might be some funky marks and all that sort of window dressing sort of stuff. But does that concentration now make you feel better or worse about the chances of this stock or this ETF breaking out and maybe testing those August highs? Because listen, if you're short right now, which I am, that would be very painful. Even if it gets those August highs, you're gonna have to make a decision there.
We've seen, to Carter's point, the flight to quality in some of these high valuation, high growth names. And by the way, I'll throw Apple in terms of high valuation. I mean, it's not ridiculous, but it's certainly expensive. And, that has been the perceived flight to safety, and that can last longer than people acknowledge. But typically that's sort of the final innings before everything starts to capitulate. And we've seen it a couple times over the last few years. But does it make me feel better? Not necessarily. Because right before our very eyes, some of these stocks, which went from reasonably valued, have gotten themselves expensive seemingly overnight. And, I'm reading through the comments, and people might be saying this in jest. It's hard to tell sarcasm in the written word, but, people talking about NVIDIA being the first $5 trillion company. I've seen things like this before at certain stages of cycles, and it typically doesn't augur particularly well. So when Apple and Microsoft are now 13% of the S&P 500, as you mentioned, literally a handful to 6 names, 50% of the NASDAQ, I mean, that's problematic because each one of those companies have idiosyncratic risk, and none of them are without flaws, and some of them are downright expensive. So, yeah, it concerns me a little bit.
And there's this, the concentration it's ever thus, right? It's the natural way of things. I mean, think about sports teams are almost always dominated by a player or two. Great political campaigns in any endeavor. In fact, the concentration in Apple and Microsoft now is analogous to AT&T and IBM going back 40 years. And at the time, right, one can never see how the champion could falter. What could possibly stop Babe Ruth here? LeBron James, he cannot be stopped. And that there's always something. What this is at this moment, the money flow into, of course, these names, hold aside NVIDIA, but the more mature growth names, Apple, Microsoft, it's literally the face of fear. I mean, it is the most offensive thing you can do, besides literally going into soup cans and detergent, is going into something that's idiosyncratic in its nature, growth, and it's not responsive or as responsive to cyclical assets in a prospective period of economic contraction. And then here's the irony and real ironies. Forget about the actual names, Apple and Microsoft. Think about the men behind them. It's like saying, I am so terrified about what's coming, I think I'll just put it all with Steve Jobs and Bill Gates. I mean, that's the most offensive thing you could do. And that's what people are doing.